Let's look at another type of hypothesis, which is the chi-squared test. Now in a chi-squared test, there's one population out of which a sample is drawn, which means there's one sample involved. And what we're testing is the variance of that sample as against the variance of the population, or a constant variance. So we are comparing the volatility of the sample with the volatility of the population, or a constant volatility. So it's sample variance versus population variance. How would the third and the fourth step change? Now, till now we were looking at the Z or the T table for the third step. For chi-squared again, we will look at the table, but instead of looking at the Z or the T table, we will look at the chi-squared table. Similarly, the fourth step, which was the calculated Z value or the calculated T value till now, will now change to calculated chi value. So you have the formula for the calculated chi-squared value, which is the sample variance upon the population variance times n-1, which is the degree of freedom. So the formula is sample volatility upon population volatility into degree of freedom. Now let's look at an example to understand this better. Historically, high return equity fund has advertised that its monthly returns have a standard deviation equal to 4%. So this becomes the population standard deviation. This was based on estimates from 1990 to 1998, so it's a reasonably longer period of time. High return wants to verify whether this claim still adequately describes the standard deviation of the fund's returns. High return collected monthly returns of the 24-month period between 1998 and 2000 and measured a standard deviation of monthly returns of 3.8%. So this is the sample standard deviation of 3.8%. Determine if the more recent standard deviation is different from the advertised standard deviation. Okay, now let's understand the case a little better. So we have this high return equity fund who has been advertising that their fund witnesses a volatility of 4%. Now, a recent study reveals that based on the sample of 24 months, the standard deviation of the fund is actually 3.8% and not 4%. Now, the question is whether high return equity fund should go back to their investor and tell them that the standard deviation is not 4%, but is actually 3.8%. Now, it depends upon whether 3.8% is significantly different from 4 or not. Let's say we conclude that 3.8% is significantly different from 4. In that situation, high return equity fund actually needs to go back to the investor and tell them that the standard deviation of the fund has changed. And let's say we conclude that 3.8% is not significantly different from 4. In that case, high return equity fund can continue to advertise that it is still 4%. Which means what we need to test is whether the sample standard deviation of 3.8% is statistically significantly different from the advertised standard deviation of 4%.